morning. Hi, I'm Rick Eberst. Welcome to the Mullin Automotive Museum here in beautiful Oxnard, California. I've been a dozen here for about 10 years, and today we have a very special time because we're going to be focused on just some of the gems and car show winners. And our first car here is actually very important because it won Pebble Beach in 2011 as the best in show. It's a 1935 Wasan called the Aerodine. And the Wasan cars, Mr. Gabriel Wasan started out building airplanes, and he built a whole lot of airplanes up to World War I. And after World War I, he started building automobiles, and he built them all in about the same way that he built his airplanes. So almost all those cars have aluminum bodies, and they are all very sleek. And you can even see the hood ornament here. It looks like a bird. It's called the coquette, and it has these struts to hold up the front fenders, much like that you would see on an airplane. It is a two-tone car, and another interesting feature of the car is this whole roof recedes back over the trunk, and it has little windows in the top so that when you put the top back, you can see out of the rear window. Now, I'm going to come around here and open the door so you can look inside at this lovely interior. Now you have to think about this interior going down the road in 1935. How much would that shock the people to see something this geometrically developed? When this car was restored, Mr. Mullin actually had to find a loom to build this fabric and to get it set up for the restoration for this car and all the other Wasans that we have. There's only, unfortunately, about 52 Wasans left in the world, and we have 17 of them in our collection. And Mr. Mullin likes to find things that are kind of really interesting, not well known, and kind of bring them back. And so Wasan was one of those kind of rare producers that a lot of people never heard of before, particularly outside of France. And he was able to not only restore this car, but kind of bring Wasan back into the everyday parlance of today's society. If you look at the dash, you can see the dash looks like an airplane. And that's because, of course, Gabriel Wasan was building airplanes. On the far left-hand side of the dash, you might see there's two black circular units that have smaller circular units inside of it. That's actually your fuse panel. Now, if you're in an airplane, you don't want the fuses under the hood because you can't get out of the side of the plane and fix them, so you put them on the inside. The other thing you might notice on the steering wheel is this beautiful chrome piece coming down here, and I always ask our visitors what they think that does, and hardly anyone can guess, but it is actually the horn. So when you push in on this unit, it makes contact back here, completes your circuit, and that honks the horn. On the far right-hand side of the dash, there are two brown-colored units here. Those are actually your infinite adjustable shock absorbers, and so as you're driving the car in real time, you can tighten or loosen the shock absorbers based upon the kind of road surface that you're on. Another interesting feature on each of the doors has a Lalique ashtray. I don't think I've seen many other cars, I don't think I've seen any cars that actually had Lalique ashtrays. So this is our 1935 Wasan Aerodine that won Pebble Beach in 2011. As I mentioned to you, we have one of the largest collection of Wasans in the world, and this is another great example. This is a 1934, 1 year earlier than the last car you saw. This is also a Wasan. And one thing interesting about Gabriel Wasan, in the age of bespoke cars where people, one person would build a chassis and someone else would build the body, Gabriel Wasan was one of the people who actually designed and built his own bodies for his cars. However, this particular car is an exception because this car was, the chassis was purchased by the Shah of Persia, which eventually became Iran, and it was then taken to a very famous person named Figoni. And Figoni was the person who designed and had the body built for this car. And Figoni was probably one of the best automotive body designers of the period, and is still known today as having some of the greatest designs ever for cars. We actually have quite a few of his works here in our collection. So this car is called the Grand Sport. They only made two of these chassis, and we happen to own both of them. One has a body that was built by Gabriel Wasan, and this one, of course, has a body that was built by Figoni. It has this lovely wood trim all the way around, this hand-carved wood trim, and with the ostrich skin interior in it. You can also see again the horn up here that you saw in the Aerodine. Interesting story about this car. The Shah of Persia used to drive this car around with his gun bearer sitting next to him, and if he saw anything, a wild animal or whatever, that he wanted to go after, he would just stop the car and would go hunting. So, interesting car. Mr. Mullin was able to purchase this car and had this total complete restoration. It's won many, many awards, and it's just one of the most beautiful cars I think we have in our collection. I would say that many women who come to our museum prefer this as the car they like the best. At least that's what they tell me. But it's hard to choose given all the choices that we have. So this is again the 1934 Wasan Grand Sport with the body by Figoni. Well, this is the 1937 Tabalago. It's called the teardrop car. It's shaped like a teardrop. In fact, some people think that Mr. Figoni, who was also the designer of this car, saw a teardrop come down the cheek of his wife, and he said there's nothing more naturally occurring, symmetrical element in the world than a teardrop. Now, this car actually is a race car. It raced and came in second at Le Mans, and the next year its sister came in first, so it is a race car. And when Le Mans first started, the Grand Prix racing were actually street legal cars, not like you see today with the Formula One cars. So this car is a 6-cylinder, has about 140 horsepower. It also has a Wilson pre-selector on it, which is a racing feature that allows you to shift gears without actually reaching down to touch a shifting lever. You just have a lever. In this case, it's on the column, and you move it where you want it. It also has a sunroof on it. And Figoni was a person who invented sunroofs. So it's kind of an interesting combination of features. If you look behind the doors in the back, you'll see the trafficators or turn signals. The friend of one of the owners said he thought he could drive this car from Paris to Nice, France in less time than it took the train. And it took the train, he made quite a large bet, and it took the train about 10 hours, and he was able to drive this car from Paris to Nice in 9 hours and 45 minutes, and he won a large amount of money. So it's really interesting. You think about this, driving through the Maritime Alps in this kind of car in curvy roads and still going as fast as you could. Oh. See if we can open the door here. You can see on the inside is a bench seat rather than bucket seats, and if you look at the steering column, you can see the Wilson pre-selector, and of course the beautiful built-in luggage behind the seats here. These are what we would call touring cars, and that meant that you would get in your car and drive around the countryside and stop off at little inns, and you needed to have your luggage. I believe we're opening the hood here, which is a real treat to see this lovely engine. Gorgeous aluminum engine, like I said, 140 horsepower, 3 carburetors, beautifully finished. And you can actually see what they did in a lot of the French cars. They put the name of the car down below into the block. And the interesting thing, of course, about all these cars is the inside of the cars are just as well finished as the outside. And they're actually all pieces of artwork. Some of these engines, when you see them running, it's like watching way beautiful Swiss watch movements. They're just very smooth, very calm, but yet very powerful. Well, we have another Figoni car here that is a 1937 Delahaye 135, actually MS, because it's got 3 carburetors. It's a 6-cylinder engine. Beautiful body by Figoni. This car actually was purchased by a gentleman in England, and shortly after he picked up the car, he was an international trader, he had the car shipped to India. And he was friends with several Maharajas over there, and one of the Maharajas, who was a pretty high-ranking prince, fell in love with this car and basically said, I want the car, and he ended up buying the car from the Englishman. The car was then handed down to several different other Maharajas, and as it got handed down, one of the Maharajas was actually in a car accident with it where the rear end and the front end were damaged. The Maharaja somehow thought that he could restore the car himself, and so he started the restoration and was never able to finish it. And eventually another Englishman was able to buy the car after it sat up on blocks for many years, and took the car apart and shipped all the parts back to England, where it was restored by a British company. The British company evidently didn't know Delahaye very well, because they didn't put the headlights in the right spot, which I think probably the Maharaja had made that mistake himself. But when Mr. Mullin eventually bought this car, he undertook a complete restoration and restored the headlights to where they're supposed to be, built into these pontoon fenders. Now, Figoni had his workshop near an airport in France and outside of Paris. And because he had this close proximity to an airport, he was very highly influenced by aeronautical design. He was also lucky because a lot of people that own airplanes could afford to buy his cars. So if you look at the bulbous fenders up here, that is really a sign of Figoni. It is thought that he got these from the aerodynamic bubbles that were around the landing gear of airplanes. And so if you think of some of the old airplanes that look like this flowing pontoon, we think that might have been part of the inspiration for the car. Now, I've had this car at Pebble Beach. It's won many awards there. I also had this car at Keels and Wheels, which is a lovely event in Texas, where it won Best in Show for European car. They do a Best in Show for American car and Best in Show for European. Lovely thing about Figoni cars is that he would have these beautiful little taillights in the back built right into the end of these fenders. Now, when you think of these cars, you have to think of these being built the bodies being built as a patchwork quilt made out of smaller pieces. So these are all smaller pieces that are all put together to form these individual body panels. So they're not like stamped out of any kind of format. They're individually made. So getting all these pieces to come back into that fine little end is quite a trick and quite an artistic achievement. Our next car has nothing to do with Figoni, but it is an interesting car because it has a French chassis. It has a body designed by a Czechoslovakian and built by a Frenchman. So it's kind of an interesting combination of cars. This is the 1938 Dubonnet Hispano Suiza, also known as the Zenia. Mr. Dubonnet, who was the son of the gentleman who invented the Dubonnet aperitif, was a World War I airplane fighter pilot, and became an aeronautical designer, and actually became a person that was an engineer really interested in suspension pieces. And so he came up with this Hispano Suiza chassis and made quite a few really wonderful suspension improvements. One is called the Hyperflex suspension, which actually he licensed to General Motors for quite a few years. And in order to show off his great suspension, he personally designed this one-off body. So this is a one-of-one car. Even though it's a Hispano Suiza, the body has just one-of-one design, which he designed, and then a gentleman named Salchek was the person who actually was the carrossier who built it. The car is called the Zenia. He named it after his first wife, and when she died, he did get remarried, and the story is that his second wife was not pleased that there was a car around named the Zenia, and said that he should get rid of it, and he evidently put it away in hiding. And I guess fortunately the marriage didn't last very long, but he still ended up with this car. There's many interesting features on this car. The most radical thing you probably would notice out of all the things that are radical is the windshield, which is a curved piece of glass. We think the first time it was ever used on a car. Also, the side windows are curved, and even the side rear windows are curved. The top actually is a target top, and the whole top can lift off, and the windows do not go down. The windows only come up on the side. If you come back to the back, you might notice that some people think this car was the one that inspired the Batmobile, given its radical design. It also has, you'll call it a trunk here, that lifts up, and there's custom-built luggage that's designed on angles to fit into this area. Interesting historical piece about this car is this car, right after World War II, led the parade through the St. Cloud Tunnel when they reopened it after World War II. And so this car was the first car that went through there. The car actually came back to France a few years ago when they reenacted that opening of the St. Cloud Tunnel. And there's an interesting historical piece there also, in that a gentleman came up to the car and started crying when he saw the car, and it turned out he was the 10-year-old who was sitting in the back of the car because his father was given the privilege to drive this car through the tunnel. So they allowed the gentleman to sit in the back when they reenacted that, so he got a chance to ride in it again. Well, we have the hood open here in our Dubonnet Zenia, and it is a 6-cylinder, about 8-liter, 160 horsepower, single carburetor updraft. This has a 3-speed transmission, and if you can look at the side, you can again see on the side that the Hispano Suiza logo is over there on the side of the engine, which is a feature on most all these French cars. We have opened both of the doors, and I want to, when we get a chance to show you that, I want to show you how interesting these doors are. This car actually won Best in Show at the Windsor Castle Concours in England, and it's won many other awards because of its beautiful restoration and its wonderful design. And of course, it is a one-of-one car. So the doors on this actually come out and then move back to the rear on both sides. Really provides a lot of easy access to the car. You might notice that the starter is actually down here between the seats next to the gear shift lever. And of course, it just has this cocoa mats on the floor and bamboo around the steering wheel. The steering wheel, if you notice, also, like most of the cars at the time, had adjustments on it, because as you were driving, you had to adjust the advance and retard on the ignition, the air-fuel mixture, and there's also a throttle. And so it's a little bit like a speed control. You push the pedal down to where you want it and then slide this little lever over, and it could hold the accelerator down if you wanted to take your foot off the accelerator. So again, this is our 1938 Hispano Suiza Dubonnet, also known as the Zenia. What you see here is not only a winner of Best in Show at Pebble Beach, but it's also selected as the best of the best car at the Quail 2 years ago. So it is quite a highly regarded and probably considered to be the most valuable car in the world. At least we think it's the most valuable car in the world. It's a 1936 Bugatti Type 57 SC, also called the Atlantique. Now, the SC in this car stands for Surbaissé, which means lowered chassis, and the C stands for compressor. Now, the first owner of this car was Lord Philip Rothschild of England. This was actually his college car. He drove this car around Cambridge when he was 18 and going to Trinity College. He originally bought the car without a supercharger, and then after about a year or so, he sent it back to Molsheim, and they put a supercharger on it. It also had hydraulic brakes added to it. This car has sold probably 3 times in its life for the most amount of money we think ever sold at a public auction. When it originally sold, we think this car cost the equivalent of about $12,000. Now, you don't think that's too much now, but back then you could buy a nice house in St. Louis for about $4,000. So this was quite a very expensive car. Probably 250,000 French francs at the time. It also then, in 1971, a doctor who had done some time during the war in England and got kind of fascinated with Bugatti cars and French cars, purchased this car, and he paid, in 1971, he paid about $59,000 for this car. Well, again, you don't think that's too much today, but it was the most amount of money ever paid for a car at a public auction at the time. Now, I happen to own a 1966 Corvette, and when it was brand new, it cost $6,000. A Chrysler LeBaron convertible cost $1,900, so my little Corvette was 3 times the price of that car, and just think of how much a car of $59,000 would be. So then this car went on to win Best in Show at Pebble Beach, and Mr. Mullin was able to buy the car, and we have it here in our collection. I'm so happy it's here because it's such a popular car. It travels all over the world, and many times it's not here, so it's just such a pleasure to have it back. Now, one of the features you have to notice on this car are the rivets and the fins on the fenders. The original car was supposed to be made out of a magnesium body, and at the time you could not weld magnesium. So the way to hold these big, large body panels together, in fact the whole car, was to have these tabs with the rivets. Now, there were 4 of these cars that were built. This was the first one of the production cars, if you want to call 4 cars a production. This one, as I said, was originally bought by Lord Philip Rothschild. There's only 2 of these cars left that we know of that are original condition cars. The 4th one is owned by Ralph Lauren, and it's black. Chassis number 2 for this car is also a black car, and that car is missing. We're not sure what happened to it. But I would think if you ever go to any old barns, you might want to keep your eye open. We don't know if it was destroyed during the war. We don't know if it was buried, because a lot of Bugattis were buried and hidden away during the war. Chassis number 3, a gentleman owned that car, and he let his girlfriend drive the car, and she stalled it out on the railroad tracks, and they were hit by a train, killing them both. If we get a picture of the rear of this car, you can see it has a split window in it. And as for a guy like me who owns a Corvette coupe, that's a very important thing, because this car inspired Bill Mitchell, who was the designer of the mid-year Corvettes, to put a split window in the 1963 Corvette. It was a lot bigger than this, and there was quite a controversy because the engineer, Zora Dindorf, did not like the split window because he said it was hard to see his racing competition out of the back window. But they did do it for that 1 year and 1 year only. You can also see the trunk back here is a circular piece, again with the large fin. There's a little lever that you put your fingers down here on a spring-loaded device and move it down to the little notch, and then you have to lift the whole trunk lid out straight, because with the fin it cannot hinge. You might also notice it has 5 tailpipes. Okay, this has a Type 50 engine in it, which is a 8-cylinder with double overhead cams. You can also see down here the supercharger, and this little device is the backfire device. So if the supercharger and the engine backfire, it blows out there, and there is a grill here, so it doesn't blow the grill off the front of the car. You might see on all of our race cars, they have a little hole in the side for that very purpose. So you can see our beautiful, what we refer to as suicide doors. Big opening area to get in and out. Not the easiest car to get in and out of, but the roof is curved up at the top. Same way that my Corvette is, actually interesting. There's a little extra room up here so you can get in without banging your head too much. The seats in the car are what you would find in all the Bugatti type cars. They were pretty straightforward and simple. And a lot of times they were just a seat that came with the chassis, and as people would build the bodies and the interiors, they would put different kinds of seats into them. But a lot of people said, no, wait, Ettore Bugatti or Jean Bugatti designed those seats. I'm not getting rid of them. So you can see, if you look at the dash, a beautiful wood dash. This actually is your trafficators down here. The trafficators are on a timer. So when you turn the switch, the trafficator pops out, and then it's like a kitchen timer. It ticks back down, and when it's done, the trafficator moves back into the body panel. There is a little storage area back here in the back. There is not the normal luggage that you might see here, but there is a little bit of a storage area. The 2 long levers sticking out from the side down there are your advanced and retired. You usually retard down when you're starting the car, and then you adjust it back up. And so you have the throttle and the advanced retard there that you can use on the dash. This car actually has two motors on the windshield wiper. Some of the other cars have the one motor with the two windshield wiper blades connected by a rod, but with the seam here and the fin, you cannot do that. Here you can see on the door, if you look on that side, you can see there's a little air vent on the side that you can open and close to put air into the side of the car. And there's actually a little hole in the back in case you get any water in there, the water drips out. The most gorgeous car in the world as far as I'm concerned, probably the most valuable car in the world. And of course, we think it's the queen of our show, but we happen to be a kingdom with lots of queens. Well, we've seen a lot of beautiful, totally restored cars, and now what we want to show you is some cars that are in completely original condition. These are all cars out of the Schlumpf Reserve Collection, which Mr. Mullin purchased many years ago. He bought a total of about 65 cars. He's kept about 35 of the ones that he likes the best. There's 5 that we show here right now, or 6 I should say, but there's 5 that are Bugattis. So we have 3 Type 40s that we have here, and then we have, those are basically a Tory Bugatti design cars, and then we have 3 cars that were designed by Jean Bugatti. Jean Bugatti liked to name his cars after either Greek goddesses or mountain passes. So the 2 cars here that you see with the large slanted windshields are called Vertu, and Vertu is a mountain pass in France. The one in the middle, which is an interesting car, it's actually a 4-door car that looks like a 2-door car, is called a Gabriel. And Gabriel is the tallest mountain pass in France. And this is interesting because there's really no B-pillar here. You just have the frames for the front and the rear door. The rear door opens like a suicide door, and the front door opens like a regular door. Now, these all come from the Schlumpf collection, and it's quite an interesting story, but Arlette Schlumpf was able to inherit what was called the Reserve Collection from her husband, and after she died, this collection of 65 cars was put up for sale. And the way they decided to sell these cars is to sell all 65 cars at once. And so they actually called Mr. Mullin and said, we hear you might have an interest in some of the cars in the Schlumpf collection, but we've decided to sell them all at once. So if you want to buy and be involved in this, you need to buy all 65 cars. This is the price, non-negotiable, and you have 48 hours to make up your mind. Fortunately, Mr. Mullin, I believe, was in Scotland at the time, was able to quickly fly over to France, where he looked at these cars, and he was able to make the deal to buy all 65 cars. If you look on the wall behind here, you will see an enlarged photograph, actually, of where these cars were being stored at the time that he purchased them. And unfortunately, while they were there, people would break into the storage area. They would damage the cars. They stole all the Bugatti logos. They would take the steering wheels. They would take the rear tires, the spare tires. They actually took the radiator off one of these cars, and so they were kind of pretty much damaged and destroyed and vandalized. So Mr. Mullin bought them, and he decided, you know, cars are only original once. You can restore a car 10, 20, 30 times if you like, but they're only original once. And so the goal here is to keep these cars as they were found, so that my grandchildren and great-grandchildren can come to this museum and see these cars in their total original condition. The last car I want to show you here is really important. You notice I kind of stand away from it a little bit because this was thought to be John Bugatti's personal car. It's a 1931 Type 40, and we don't like to get too close to this car, and it is, as I said, in original condition. Well, we hope that you'll be able to come after we get all this virus thing taken care of, that you can come to our museum and see us in person. We'd love to have you here. We are going to probably be, after the opening is allowed, we'll probably be open 3 or 4 days a week. So we'll have many more options for you to come. Hopefully you'll be able to do that. We really love having you here. And it's always great to greet the people that come from locally or all around the world. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed this brief little look at the Mullin Automotive Museum's gems.